The morning mist clung to the mountains surrounding Millbrook like a gray blanket, and Eden Matthews pulled her coat tighter as she walked to work. At 48, she had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of this small town, so different from the chaos she had once known. The Bell and Save grocery store sat on Main Street, its red brick facade weathered by decades of mountain winters. "Morning, Eden," called Mrs. Henderson from across the street, waving from her flower shop. Eden managed a small wave back. Her smile practiced but distant. 3 years in Millbrook, and she was still the newcomer who kept to herself. Inside the store, the familiar scent of cleaning products and fresh bread welcomed her. Eden tied her green apron around her waist and began arranging canned goods on the shelves in the household products aisle. The repetitive work suited her. No decisions to make, no lives hanging in the balance, no screaming voices echoing in her memory. Her hands moved automatically as she stocked shelves, but her mind wandered to the dreams that still haunted her nights. The refugee camp in Jordan, the makeshift medical tents, the endless stream of patients with wounds that told stories of unimaginable suffering. She had been Dr. Eden Matthews then, respected, competent, saving lives daily, until the day everything went wrong. "Eden, could you help me with these boxes?" asked Tommy, the teenager who worked part-time after school. His freckled face was earnest as he struggled with the delivery of laundry detergent. "Of course." Eden lifted the boxes easily, her movements efficient and careful. She had always been strong, even before her medical training taught her to be precise with her hands. Tommy reminded her of Ahmed, a young volunteer at the camp who had been eager to help, always asking questions about medicine and patient care. The memory brought the familiar ache to her chest. Ahmed had died in a bombing 3 months after she left. She'd learned about it from a colleague's email, another reminder of the world she'd abandoned and the people she couldn't save. The morning passed quietly until Sarah Chen, the store manager, approached her during the lunch break. Sarah was in her 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and had been one of the few people in town who didn't ask too many questions when Eden arrived. "Eden, I've been thinking," Sarah said, settling into the break room chair across from her. "You've been here 3 years now, and you're one of our best employees. Have you ever considered applying for the assistant manager position? It's opening up next month." Eden nearly choked on her sandwich. The thought of more responsibility, more visibility, more chances for people to ask questions about her past made her stomach tighten. "I'm fine where I am, Sarah." "Really? But you're so good with organization, and you have this way of staying calm under pressure. The customers trust you. Mrs. Patterson was just saying yesterday how you helped her figure out which medication would be best for her arthritis pain." If only they knew, Eden thought. If only they knew what happens when I can't stay calm. "Thank you, but I prefer working on the floor," Eden said firmly. Sarah looked disappointed, but didn't push further. That was another thing Eden appreciated about Millbrook. People generally respected boundaries. That afternoon, as Eden restocked the pharmacy section, she found herself staring at the over-the-counter medications. Acetaminophen, ibuprofen, antihistamines. Such simple remedies for everyday problems. Nothing like the complex cases she used to handle. The refugees who arrived at the camp with wounds that told stories she wished she could forget. Her fingers traced the labels automatically, noting expiration dates and organizing by dosage strength. Even in this mundane task, her medical training showed through. She couldn't help but notice when Mrs. Patterson bought the wrong strength pain reliever for her arthritis, or when Mr. Chen selected a decongestant that would interact poorly with his blood pressure medication. The memory hit her without warning. The tent clinic in the refugee camp, the smell of antiseptic mixing with dust and desperation. The child who had been brought to her too late, the parents' faces twisted with grief, the accusations that followed. Her hands had been steady then, her mind sharp, but it hadn't been enough. 10-year-old Yasmin had arrived at the clinic unconscious, dehydrated from 3 days of severe diarrhea. Her parents had carried her for 2 days to reach the camp, hoping the foreign doctors could save her. Eden had worked frantically, intravenous fluids, antibiotics, electrolyte replacement, but Yasmin's little body had been pushed too far. She died 6 hours after arrival. "Dr. Matthews, you did everything you could," her colleague Dr. Patel had said afterward. But Eden had seen the doubt in his eyes, had heard the whispers among the staff. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. To her reputation, to her confidence, and most of all, to her belief in herself. The worst part hadn't been the medical review or even the administrative suspension pending investigation. It had been the moment when Yasmin's father, grief-stricken and desperate for someone to blame, had grabbed her hands and shouted in broken English, "You kill my daughter! You kill her!" Security had pulled him away, but his words echoed in Eden's mind for months afterward. Eden shook her head, forcing the memory away. That was the past. This was her life now, simple, safe, predictable. No one depended on her for life and death decisions. No one could blame her when tragedy struck. The bell above the store entrance chimed, and Mrs. Rodriguez entered with her 6-year-old daughter, Maria. The little girl was usually full of energy, racing between the aisles while her mother shopped, but today she walked slowly, leaning against her mother's leg. "Is Maria feeling okay?" Eden asked as they passed her aisle. The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Old habits from when observing and caring came as naturally as breathing. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned. "She's been tired all morning and she feels warm. I'm hoping it's just a little cold. You know how kids pick up everything at school." Eden nodded, but something about the way Maria moved, the slight tremor in her hands, the particular pallor of her skin, caught her attention. It reminded her of something she couldn't quite place, a pattern she'd seen before in pediatric cases. She watched them disappear toward the pharmacy section, a familiar unease stirring in her chest. Maria's gait was slightly unsteady, not the typical wobble of a tired child, but something more concerning. Her posture suggested pain, particularly in her joints. "You're not a doctor anymore," she reminded herself. "It's not your job to diagnose." But as she continued working, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her medical instincts, dormant for 3 years, were suddenly alert and insistent. She found herself watching every customer who entered, particularly those with children, looking for signs of illness. This was exactly what she had come to Millbrook to avoid. The constant vigilance, the responsibility, the weight of knowing when something was wrong and feeling compelled to act. She had chosen the grocery store specifically because it was the antithesis of medicine, straightforward, predictable, with clear tasks that had nothing to do with human suffering. Yet, as she arranged products on shelves, her mind was analyzing symptoms, considering differential diagnoses, and worrying about a 6-year-old girl whose mother thought she just had a cold. By Thursday morning, Eden had noticed a pattern that made her increasingly uncomfortable. 3 more children had come into the store with their parents over the past 2 days, all showing similar symptoms: fatigue, low-grade fever, and a peculiar pallor that reminded her of something she couldn't quite place. The similarity was too specific to be coincidental. Eden had seen enough pediatric cases during her refugee medicine years to recognize when symptoms clustered in concerning ways. Individual cases might be random, but patterns usually indicated something more serious. She was arranging breakfast cereals when she overheard Mrs. Patterson talking to Sarah at the checkout counter, her voice tight with worry that seemed disproportionate to a simple childhood illness. "Jamie barely slept last night," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "His fever spiked to 101, and he keeps complaining that his head hurts. I called Dr. Wilson's office, but they can't see him until next week." Eden's hands stilled on a box of cornflakes. Dr. Wilson was the only doctor in Millbrook, an elderly general practitioner who saw patients at the small health clinic 3 days a week. For anything serious, people had to drive the 2 hours to the regional hospital in Cedar Falls. "Have you tried the children's Tylenol?" Sarah suggested helpfully. "Yes, but it only helps for a few hours. And he's so pale. I've never seen him look like this. It's like—" Mrs. Patterson paused, searching for words. "It's like he's sick from the inside out, if that makes sense." Eden found herself moving closer to the conversation, her medical training pulling her forward despite her better judgment. The phrase "sick from the inside out" triggered recognition. She'd heard similar descriptions from parents describing systemic inflammatory conditions. "Excuse me," she said quietly, immediately regretting the impulse, but unable to stop herself. "How long has Jamie been sick?" Mrs. Patterson turned to her, surprised. Eden rarely initiated conversations with customers beyond the basics of helping them find products. She was known as friendly, but reserved, someone who kept to herself. 3 days now. It started with just being tired, but yesterday the fever began, and now— She trailed off, looking helpless. Has he had any other symptoms? Nausea, joint pain, skin changes? The questions came automatically, her clinical training overriding her determination to remain uninvolved. "Well, yes, actually. His knees have been hurting, and there's a strange rash on his arms. Just little red spots. How did you know?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with surprise and a flicker of hope. Eden's heart began to race. The combination of symptoms was familiar, desperately familiar. Joint pain in children, petechial rash, fever, and fatigue. It could be several things, but in combination, it suggested something serious that required immediate attention. "Mrs. Patterson, I think you should take Jamie to Dr. Wilson today, not next week." "But they said—" "Tell them it's urgent. Mention the joint pain and the rash specifically. Those symptoms together." Eden stopped herself before she could provide a diagnosis. She wasn't a doctor here. She was a grocery store employee who had overstepped her bounds. Mrs. Patterson stared at her for a moment, clearly wondering how a store clerk knew enough about medical symptoms to give such specific advice. But the desperation of a worried mother won out over curiosity. "Okay. Thank you, Eden. I didn't know you knew about medical things." After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah approached Eden with curious eyes that held questions Eden wasn't prepared to answer. "That was impressive. Do you have some medical background?" "I used to work in healthcare," Eden said carefully, keeping her response vague. "A long time ago." Sarah seemed to want to ask more, but Tommy called from the back room about a delivery, and the moment passed. Eden was grateful for the interruption, though she knew the questions would come back eventually. That afternoon, Eden couldn't concentrate on her work. The symptoms she had heard about were too specific, too concerning to ignore. Joint pain, fever, rash, fatigue. In adults, it might suggest rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. But in children, especially in a cluster like this, it could indicate something far more serious. She found herself watching every customer who entered, particularly those with children. When 5-year-old Kevin Chen came in with his mother, clinging to her leg and whimpering softly, Eden noted his flushed cheeks and the way he favored his left leg when walking. "Is Kevin feeling all right?" she asked Mrs. Chen as they passed her aisle. "He's been cranky all day and his temperature is a little high. I thought it might be growing pains, but he seems really uncomfortable." Growing pains didn't cause fever. Eden bit back the urge to suggest a medical evaluation, remembering her resolve to stay uninvolved. But the pattern was becoming clearer, and her medical instincts were screaming warnings that she couldn't ignore. She was still thinking about it when her shift ended. Instead of going straight home to her small apartment above the bakery, she found herself walking toward the health clinic. Dr. Wilson was probably gone for the day, But maybe she could learn something, or at least determine if other children were showing similar symptoms. The clinic was a small building next to the library, with a hand-painted sign that had seen better years. Through the window, Eden could see the waiting room was empty, but there was still a light on in the back office. She knocked on the door, and after a moment, Dr. Wilson appeared. He was a man in his 70s, with white hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. Eden had seen him around town, but had never spoken with him directly. "We're closed for the day," he said gently, "but if it's an emergency—" "I'm Eden Matthews. I work at Bell & Save. I was wondering if I could ask you about something." Dr. Wilson studied her for a moment, his experienced eyes taking in details that most people would miss. "You're the one who told Patricia Patterson to bring Jamie in today, aren't you?" Eden nodded, wondering how he'd made that connection so quickly. "Come in," Dr. Wilson said, stepping aside. His office was cluttered but organized, with medical journals stacked on every surface and diplomas covering one wall. The familiar smell of antiseptic and paper records took Eden back to the camp clinic, bringing a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. "I examined Jamie this afternoon," Dr. Wilson said, settling into his chair behind a desk that looked like it had been there for decades. "You were right to be concerned. His symptoms are unusual for a typical childhood illness. The joint pain, the specific type of rash. I've been practicing for 45 years and I can't quite place it." Eden's mouth went dry. A physician with 45 years of experience was puzzled by symptoms that had triggered her medical instincts immediately. Either she was overreacting, or the situation was more serious than she'd feared. "Have you seen other children with similar symptoms?" 3 others this week, all between the ages of 5 and 12, all with the same presentation: fever, joint pain, petechial rash, and severe fatigue. I've run basic blood work, but I don't have the facilities here for more complex testing. 4 children with identical symptoms. Eden felt the familiar weight of medical responsibility settling on her shoulders, and she fought against it. This wasn't her problem. She wasn't a doctor anymore. "What were the blood results?" Dr. Wilson looked at her sharply. "You have medical training, don't you?" Eden hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in denying what was becoming obvious. "I was a doctor. Before." "Well, then you'll understand. White cell count is elevated, but not dramatically. Platelet count is low, which explains the petechial rash. But there's something else. The children all have a specific pattern of joint inflammation that I've never seen before. Low platelets causing petechial rash, joint inflammation, fever, and fatigue." The combination sent a chill down Eden's spine. She'd seen similar presentations in refugee children, but only in the context of specific infectious diseases or autoimmune conditions that were rare in developed countries. "Have you contacted the regional hospital?" "I tried. They're swamped with flu cases, and without more definitive symptoms, they suggested supportive care and monitoring. They said if it gets worse, to transport the children to Cedar Falls." "Transport might not be possible," Eden said quietly, remembering the weather forecasts she'd been hearing on the radio. Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The Weather Service is predicting a major storm system moving in this weekend. If it's as bad as they're saying, the mountain roads could be impassable for days." The doctor's face grew grave. "You think this is something serious, don't you?" Eden met his eyes, seeing in them the same concern that was building in her own mind. "I think we need to be prepared for the possibility." As she walked home through the darkening streets of Millbrook, Eden felt the weight of knowledge that she couldn't ignore. If her suspicions were correct, the town was facing a medical crisis that could turn deadly, especially if they became isolated by weather. That night, Eden lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through differential diagnoses and treatment protocols. She had managed to avoid medical situations for 3 years, but now one was finding her anyway. She got up and turned on her laptop, something she rarely did except to pay bills or check the weather. But tonight, she found herself searching medical databases, looking for disease patterns that matched what Dr. Wilson had described. The search terms came automatically: pediatric inflammatory syndrome, joint pain fever rash, autoimmune pediatric conditions, infectious causes of systemic inflammation in children. As the hours passed and the search results narrowed, a terrible possibility began to take shape: pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome, a condition that had emerged during the pandemic but could be triggered by various viral infections. It caused exactly the symptoms Dr. Wilson had described, could progress rapidly to organ failure, and required immediate intensive treatment to prevent fatal complications. If she was right, the children of Millbrook were in more danger than anyone realized. And if the predicted storm isolated them from outside medical help, the consequences could be catastrophic. Eden's hand shook as she read the clinical descriptions and case studies. The mortality rate without proper treatment was significant. Even with proper treatment, the condition required resources that a small rural clinic simply didn't have. She closed the laptop and returned to bed, but sleep was impossible. Medical knowledge was both a gift and a curse. It allowed her to help people, but it also meant she couldn't unknow what she knew. The children of Millbrook were in danger, and she might be the only person who could help them. The question was whether she had the courage to try.
"Fine," Eden replied, though nothing was fine. If her suspicions were correct, the town was facing a medical crisis that could turn deadly, especially with the approaching storm. As if to underscore her fears, the morning brought a steady stream of worried parents. Mrs. Chen came in asking for children's fever reducers, her 5-year-old son Kevin clinging to her leg, glassy-eyed and pale. Eden noted that Kevin's condition had worsened since yesterday. His skin had a grayish pallor, and when he moved, she could see him favoring multiple joints. Mr. Foster bought throat lozenges for his 8-year-old daughter, mentioning that she'd developed a sore throat overnight along with her other symptoms. Eden recognized the pattern immediately. What began as joint pain and fever was progressing to involve other systems. "How long has Emma been sick?" Eden asked, unable to stop herself from gathering more clinical information. 3 days. Started just like the other kids, tired, achy, but now she can barely swallow, and her fever is climbing. Emma Foster made 6 confirmed cases, all following the same progression. Eden felt her stomach tighten with each new piece of information that confirmed her fears. By noon, Eden had counted 7 children showing the same pattern of illness. The number was growing too fast for comfort, and the symptoms were progressing more rapidly than she'd initially feared. During her lunch break, she walked to the health clinic despite the thickening snow. The air had the electric feeling that preceded major storms, and the wind was beginning to pick up. If the weather predictions were accurate, they had perhaps 12 hours before the town became completely isolated. Dr. Wilson was examining a young boy while his mother held his hand, her face creased with worry that seemed to fill the small waiting room like a tangible presence. "Eden," Dr. Wilson called when he saw her through the open door. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Eden waited in the outer office while he finished with his patient. Through the thin walls, she could hear the boy crying softly and his mother's soothing whispers. When they were alone, Dr. Wilson's expression was grim. "2 more children this morning, and I just got a call from the elementary school. The principal says at least 15 students have gone home sick in the past 2 days with similar symptoms." 15? Eden felt her stomach drop. The number was far higher than she'd realized, suggesting either rapid spread or a longer incubation period than typical viral illnesses. "Dr. Wilson, I spent some time researching last night. I think I know what this might be." The older doctor leaned forward intently. Tell me. The symptom pattern: fever, joint pain, petechial rash, fatigue, combined with the age range and the speed of spread. I think we might be looking at a variant strain of pediatric inflammatory syndrome. Dr. Wilson's face went pale. Like the kind that appeared during the pandemic? Similar, but this presents differently. If I'm right, it can progress rapidly to systemic inflammation, heart complications, organ failure. Eden stopped, seeing the fear in the doctor's eyes. How rapidly? Without proper treatment? Days, maybe hours in severe cases. The weight of that statement hung between them like a physical presence. Dr. Wilson was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the snow that was now falling steadily, each flake bigger than the last. The storm is supposed to hit hard tonight. The mountain roads will be impassable by tomorrow morning. What kind of medical supplies do you have here? Basic antibiotics, some steroids, standard emergency medications. Nothing for the kind of supportive care these children might need if the syndrome progresses. Eden felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her chest, the same feeling she'd had in the refugee camp when supplies ran low and critical patients kept arriving. What about the regional hospital? Can they send supplies or personnel? I already called. They're preparing for the storm too, and they're not optimistic about being able to get anyone through the mountain passes once this weather system fully develops. They stood in silence, watching the snow accumulate on the clinic's windows. Each flake that fell was another barrier between Millbrook and the outside medical resources that could save lives. Eden could feel the weight of decision pressing down on her, the same crushing responsibility she had tried so hard to escape. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't in a distant refugee camp dealing with strangers. These were neighbors, children she'd watched grow up from behind her grocery store counter. Dr. Wilson, if I'm right about what this is, supportive care won't be enough. These children will need specific interventions: anti-inflammatory protocols, cardiac monitoring, possibly plasma therapy if the syndrome triggers severe inflammatory response. You're talking about intensive care level treatment. Yes, which we can't provide here. No, not with standard protocols. Dr. Wilson studied her carefully, and Eden could see him weighing her words against his own medical knowledge and experience. But you have an idea, don't you? Eden hesitated. 3 years of trying to forget, trying to be just another small-town employee, and now medical necessity was pulling her back into the world she had fled. There might be alternative approaches, she said finally, improvised treatments using available resources. But it would be... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Risky? Experimental, unproven, potentially dangerous. More dangerous than doing nothing? Eden met his eyes. That depends on whether I'm right about the diagnosis. The clinic door chimed, and Mrs. Rodriguez entered carrying Maria, who looked far worse than she had just 2 days ago. The little girl's skin had a grayish pallor, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. Eden could see immediately that Maria was progressing to the next stage of the syndrome. "Doctor, please," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice breaking. "She can't keep anything down, and her fever is so high." Dr. Wilson immediately took Maria's temperature while Eden watched, her clinical instincts automatically assessing the child's condition. The thermometer read 104.2 degrees. Maria's pulse was rapid and thready. Her lips had a bluish tinge, and when Dr. Wilson checked her reflexes, they were sluggish. "We need to get her fever down immediately," Dr. Wilson said, reaching for medication. But Eden could see what he couldn't, the subtle signs that suggested this wasn't just a high fever. It was the beginning of systemic inflammation. "Dr. Wilson," she said quietly, "look at her fingertips." He looked, and his expression changed. Maria's fingertips were slightly swollen and discolored, another sign of the inflammatory syndrome Eden feared. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Dr. Wilson said gently, "I'm going to need to examine Maria more thoroughly. Eden, could you stay? I might need your assistance." Eden felt herself nodding, though part of her wanted to run. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at her with desperate hope, and Eden realized that in this moment, it didn't matter what had happened in her past. A child needed help, and she was the only person in Millbrook with the knowledge that might save her. Outside, the snow continued to fall with increasing intensity, and Eden could hear the wind beginning to howl around the building. The storm was arriving ahead of schedule, and with it, the isolation that would trap them all in whatever crisis was about to unfold. As she watched Maria struggle to breathe, Eden felt the last of her resistance crumble. She was a doctor, and children were dying. Nothing else mattered. By evening, the wind howled like a living thing around the clinic, and snow piled against the windows in drifts that already reached halfway up the glass. Dr. Wilson had called Eden after her shift ended, asking her to return to help with what was rapidly becoming a crisis. Maria Rodriguez was not alone anymore. 4 other children had been brought in as their conditions worsened, and the small clinic was overwhelmed. Parents huddled in the waiting area, their faces tight with fear as they watched their children struggle with symptoms that seemed to be escalating by the hour. "Eden, thank God you're here," Dr. Wilson said as she entered. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his white coat stained with the evidence of a long, difficult day. "I've never seen anything progress this quickly." Eden surveyed the scene with the clinical detachment she had learned to cultivate in crisis situations. Kevin Chen, age 5, lay listlessly on one examination table, his mother stroking his fevered forehead while monitoring his breathing with desperate attention. On the other table, 8-year-old Jamie Patterson was curled in a ball, whimpering softly as his mother tried to comfort him. The familiar chaos of medical crisis settled around Eden like an old coat. This was the environment she understood, where her training and instincts came alive despite 3 years of dormancy. "What's their status?" Eden asked, automatically falling into the rhythm of medical consultation. "All 5 have fevers above 103, elevated heart rates, low blood pressure. The joint pain has become severe, and the rashes are spreading. But Eden," Dr. Wilson lowered his voice, "I'm most worried about their neurological presentations." Eden moved to examine Kevin first, noting his dilated pupils and sluggish responses to stimuli. When she tested his reflexes, they were dramatically delayed, a sign that the inflammatory process was affecting his nervous system. "How long has he been like this?" "About 2 hours. It came on suddenly." Eden moved to the next child, then the next, finding the same pattern. The inflammatory response was affecting their nervous systems, exactly as she had feared. This was no longer just a systemic inflammatory condition. It was progressing to neuroinflammation, which carried significantly higher mortality rates. "Dr. Wilson, we need to talk privately," she said. They stepped into his small office, closing the door on the sounds of worried parents and whimpering children. The contrast between the chaos outside and the quiet of the office was stark. "This is pediatric inflammatory syndrome, isn't it?" Dr. Wilson asked. "A variant I've only seen once before," Eden confirmed. "In the refugee camp, we had a cluster of cases that presented similarly. The key difference is the rapid neurological involvement. What's the prognosis without proper treatment?" Eden was quiet for a moment, remembering the faces of children who hadn't survived, families destroyed by a condition that could be treated effectively with the right resources. "Dr. Wilson, in the camp we lost 3 children before we figured out how to treat it effectively." The older doctor sank into his chair. "And with proper treatment, We saved the rest. 8 children total, but it required aggressive anti-inflammatory therapy, careful fluid management, and constant monitoring. None of which we can provide here? Not with standard protocols, no. Dr. Wilson looked at her intently. But you said there might be alternative approaches. Tell me what you're thinking. Eden moved to the window, staring out at the storm that was now raging in earnest. The snow was coming down so hard that she could barely see the streetlights across the road. They were truly isolated now, cut off from any outside help for at least the next several days. In the camp, we had limited resources too. No advanced equipment, minimal pharmaceutical options. But we learned to improvise. She turned back to face him. The key is understanding what's happening physiologically. The inflammatory response is triggered by what appears to be a viral infection, but the real damage comes from the immune system's overreaction. Like a cytokine storm. Exactly. So the treatment focuses on modulating the immune response while supporting organ function. In a hospital setting, that means intensive care units, specialized medications, advanced monitoring equipment. But the fundamental principles can be adapted. How? Eden felt herself crossing a line she had sworn never to cross again. But the sound of Maria's labored breathing from the next room made the decision for her. We need to create an intensive care environment using what we have available. Continuous monitoring, aggressive temperature control, specific medication protocols adapted to available drugs. That sounds like you're proposing to practice medicine without proper facilities or authorization. I'm proposing to save these children's lives using whatever means necessary. Dr. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "What do you need me to do?" Before Eden could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. Mrs. Patterson burst in without waiting for permission, her face streaked with tears. "Dr. Wilson, something's wrong with Jamie. He's not responding to us." They rushed back into the main room to find Jamie Patterson unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. His skin had taken on a mottled appearance, and when Eden checked his pulse, it was weak and rapid. "He's going into shock," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Dr. Wilson, I need you to start an IV immediately. Normal saline, wide open." "Eden, Now," she said with quiet authority that brooked no argument. "And I need someone to call the other parents. Any child showing similar symptoms needs to be brought here immediately." Mrs. Patterson stared at her in shock. "Are you a doctor?" Eden met her eyes. "I used to be. Right now, I'm the only chance your son has." As Dr. Wilson worked to establish intravenous access, Eden began the mental calculations that would determine whether they could save these children. She had improvised medical care in refugee camps, in war zones, in situations where standard protocols were impossible. But this was different. These weren't strangers in a distant land. These were neighbors. Children she had watched grow up from behind her grocery store counter. The stakes had never felt higher, and the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her. But as she looked at Jamie Patterson's unconscious form and heard Maria Rodriguez's labored breathing, Eden felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Outside, the storm continued to rage, cutting off any possibility of evacuation or outside help. Whatever happened next would depend entirely on her ability to remember everything she had learned and to push past the trauma that had driven her from medicine in the first place. Jamie Patterson's life hung in the balance, and Eden Matthews realized there was no running away this time. By midnight, the Millbrook Health Clinic had been transformed into something resembling an intensive care unit. Eden had enlisted every able-bodied adult in town to help convert the space, moving furniture, setting up makeshift monitoring stations and creating treatment areas for what was now 9 critically ill children. The storm raged outside with unprecedented fury, making the building shudder with each gust of wind. But inside, a different kind of storm was taking place as Eden fought to save lives with resources that would have been laughable in any proper hospital. "Sarah, I need you to monitor Kevin's temperature every 15 minutes," Eden instructed the grocery store manager, who had volunteered to help when word spread through the town. "If it goes above 104.5, call me immediately." Sarah nodded, looking nervous but determined. "What exactly am I watching for? Any change in his breathing, skin color, or responsiveness? And don't hesitate to call me if something doesn't seem right." Eden had divided the volunteers into teams, each responsible for monitoring specific children. Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop was tracking fluid intake and output with the meticulous attention to detail that had made her garden famous throughout the county. Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store, had been tasked with maintaining the improvised cooling systems Eden had devised using fans, ice packs, and wet towels. The transformation of ordinary townspeople into medical assistants was remarkable. Each volunteer had thrown themselves into their assigned roles with the dedication of trained professionals, learning medical terminology and procedures with surprising speed. Dr. Wilson approached her with a clipboard, his exhaustion evident, but his determination unwavering. "I've compiled the latest vitals on all 9 children. 3 are showing signs of cardiac involvement, and Maria Rodriguez had what might have been a brief seizure about 20 minutes ago." Eden reviewed the notes quickly, her mind processing the information with the speed and precision that had once made her one of the most respected doctors in the Refugee Medical Corps. The progression was following the pattern she remembered from the camp, but faster than she'd hoped. "The seizure confirms that we're dealing with neurological inflammation," she said. "We need to intensify the anti-inflammatory protocol." "With what? We've already maxed out the doses of what we have available." Eden had been working for hours to adapt treatment protocols to their limited pharmaceutical resources. Instead of the specialized medications that would be used in a hospital, they were making do with combinations of over-the-counter anti-inflammatories, antibiotics, and steroids from Dr. Wilson's basic supply. "We're going to have to get creative," she said. "I need to make some modifications to the treatment plan." She moved to the whiteboard that Dr. Wilson typically used for patient scheduling, which was now covered with treatment protocols, medication schedules, and vital sign trends for each child. To anyone else, it would have looked like chaos, but to Eden, it represented a complex orchestration of care that was keeping 9 children alive. "Dr. Wilson, I need you to prepare a modified steroid protocol. We're going to pulse dose the prednisolone in a way that maximizes anti-inflammatory effect while minimizing side effects. That's not standard practice. Nothing about this situation is standard." As she spoke, Eden was calculating dosages in her head, adjusting for the specific needs of each child while working within the constraints of their limited supply. It was the kind of complex clinical thinking that had once been second nature to her, but which she had tried for 3 years to forget. Mrs. Rodriguez approached them, holding Maria's hand. The little girl was awake but listless, her dark eyes following the movement around the room with distant interest. "Dr. Eden," Mrs. Rodriguez said, using the title that had somehow spread through the volunteer helpers. "Maria says her chest hurts. Should I be worried?" Eden knelt down to Maria's level, her voice gentle despite the urgency she felt. "Can you show me where it hurts, sweetheart?" Maria pointed to the center of her chest, and Eden carefully listened to her heart with Dr. Wilson's stethoscope. What she heard made her stomach clench with worry, an irregular rhythm that suggested the inflammation was affecting Maria's cardiac function. "Dr. Wilson, we need to talk." she said quietly. They moved to a corner of the room where they could speak privately. She's developing cardiac involvement. Arrhythmia, possibly some degree of myocarditis. Without cardiac monitoring equipment, how can we manage that? Very carefully. Eden was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. We need to modify her treatment to include cardiac protection protocols, and we need to be prepared for the possibility that her condition could deteriorate rapidly. What about the others? I need to examine each of them for early signs of cardiac involvement. This syndrome can progress quickly, and if we miss the warning signs, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Dr. Wilson understood the implications. As Eden moved from child to child, conducting careful cardiac examinations with their limited equipment, she found herself falling deeper into the focused state of mind that had once defined her professional life. Every sound, every subtle change in skin color, every variation in breathing pattern registered in her consciousness and was instantly analyzed for significance. The familiar rhythm of intensive care medicine took over. Constant assessment, minute adjustments to treatment, the delicate balance between aggressive intervention and careful monitoring. She had missed this, she realized. Not the stress or the life and death pressure, but the sense of purpose, the feeling that her knowledge and skills were being used for their intended purpose. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Tommy, the teenager who worked at the grocery store, approached her with obvious reluctance.
Eden, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you should know. What is it? My little sister Katie. She's 6. My mom just called. Katie's starting to show the same symptoms. Fever, and she's complaining that her knees hurt. Eden felt the weight of another life settling on her shoulders. Tell your mother to bring her in immediately. Don't wait for the symptoms to get worse. The thing is, Eden, my mom's scared to drive in this storm. The roads are really bad, and she doesn't have 4-wheel drive. Eden looked around the clinic at the 9 children they were already treating, then at the volunteers who had been working tirelessly for hours. Everyone was exhausted, resources were stretched to the breaking point, and now they were facing the prospect of more cases. Tom, she called to Mr. Bradley, who was adjusting cooling fans around Jamie Patterson. Do you still have that snowplow attachment for your truck? Yeah, why? I need you to go pick up Tommy's sister. And while you're out there, I need you to check on every family with children in town. If any of them are showing symptoms, they need to be brought here immediately. Tom Bradley looked at the storm raging outside, then back at the children fighting for their lives inside the clinic. I'll get the truck started. As Tom prepared to venture into the storm, Eden realized they had crossed another threshold. This was no longer just about treating the children who were already sick. It was about finding and helping every child in Millbrook who might be affected by this mysterious syndrome. The small town's children were all now her responsibility, and with the storm isolating them from outside help, their survival depended entirely on her ability to improvise effective treatment with whatever resources they could muster.
The weight of that responsibility was crushing, but for the first time in 3 years, Eden felt like herself again. This was who she was meant to be. Not a grocery store clerk hiding from her past, but a doctor fighting to save lives when it mattered most. Outside, the wind howled with increasing ferocity, but inside the improvised ICU, Eden Matthews was exactly where she belonged. By dawn, 13 children lay in various states of illness throughout the transformed clinic. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, Eden had created a functioning medical facility that would have impressed doctors at major hospitals. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours, but adrenaline and medical necessity kept her moving from patient to patient, adjusting treatments, monitoring vital signs, and making the countless small decisions that meant the difference between life and death. The community had rallied in ways that still amazed her. Volunteers worked in shifts around the clock, each taking responsibility for specific patients under Eden's guidance. They had learned to read vital signs, recognize danger signals, and provide the kind of intensive nursing care that would normally require trained professionals. "Eden, you need to rest," Dr. Wilson said, finding her checking on Maria Rodriguez for the third time in an hour. "You're pushing yourself too hard." "I'm fine," Eden replied automatically, though she could feel fatigue beginning to cloud her judgment. "How's Jamie doing?" "Better." His fever broke about an hour ago, and his neurological responses are improving. Eden felt a surge of relief. Jamie had been the first to show severe symptoms, and his recovery was a positive sign for all of them. It proved that their improvised treatments were working, that they could actually save these children. And the others? Mixed. Kevin Chen is responding well to the treatment, but the Thompson twins are still critical. Their joint inflammation isn't responding as well as we'd hoped. The Thompson twins, Lisa and Lucy, were 7-year-old identical girls who had been brought in during the night. Their cases were particularly challenging because they seemed to be experiencing a more aggressive form of the syndrome, with higher fevers and more severe joint involvement. Eden had been puzzling over their cases, wondering if genetic factors might influence the severity of the inflammatory response. In identical twins, similar immune system variations could explain why they were both having more difficulty than the other children. "I want to try a different approach with them," Eden said. "More aggressive immunosuppression, but with careful monitoring for secondary infections." "That's risky." "Everything we're doing is risky, but Lisa's white cell count suggests her immune system is in overdrive. We need to slow it down before it causes irreversible damage." As they spoke, Mrs. Chen approached with a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been brewed hours ago. "Dr. Eden, I made fresh coffee." "You really should eat something too." Eden accepted the coffee gratefully. Mrs. Chen had been one of the most dedicated volunteers, helping with everything from monitoring her own son Kevin to preparing simple meals for the other volunteers. "How is Kevin responding?" Eden asked. "Much better. His fever is down to 100.2, and he was awake for almost an hour earlier, asking for his favorite toy." "That's excellent progress." "Dr. Eden, can I ask you something?" Eden nodded, though she continued to review the treatment chart for the Thompson twins as they spoke. "Before all this started, you worked at the grocery store. But you're clearly an experienced doctor. What happened? Why did you stop practicing?" Eden was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling on the chart. The question she had been dreading asked with such genuine concern that she couldn't dismiss it. "Sometimes things happen in medicine that make you question everything you thought you knew. But you came back. When these children needed you, you came back. I don't know that I had a choice." Mrs. Chen smiled. "There's always a choice. You chose to help." Before Eden could respond, Sarah appeared at her elbow. "Eden, I think you need to check on Lucy Thompson. Her breathing seems different." Eden immediately moved to where Lucy lay on one of the makeshift beds they had created. The 7-year-old's breathing was indeed labored, with a subtle wheezing that suggested respiratory involvement. "Dr. Wilson," Eden called quietly, "I need a stethoscope." The examination confirmed her fears. Lucy was developing pulmonary inflammation, a complication that could progress rapidly to respiratory failure. This was exactly what she had feared most, the syndrome affecting vital organ systems in ways that could be fatal without proper supportive care. "What do we do?" Dr. Wilson asked. Eden calculated their options quickly. In a hospital, Lucy would need respiratory support, possibly mechanical ventilation. Here, they had to find another way. "We need to create positive pressure ventilation using what we have available," she said. "And we need to intensify her anti-inflammatory treatment." "How do we create positive pressure ventilation without proper equipment?" Eden looked around the clinic, her mind racing through possibilities. "The pharmacy section at Bell and Save, they stock nebulizer machines for asthma patients. We can modify one to provide continuous positive airway pressure." "That's incredibly improvised." "It's what we have." Tommy, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up. "I can get the nebulizer. I have keys to the store. The storm, I can make it. It's only 2 blocks, and I know every shortcut in town." Eden looked at the young man who had shown remarkable maturity throughout this crisis. "Be careful. And bring back whatever respiratory medications you can find. Albuterol, anything for asthma or breathing problems."
As Tommy prepared to venture into the storm, Eden turned her attention back to Lucy. The little girl was conscious but frightened, her eyes wide as she struggled to breathe. "Lucy, sweetie, I know it's hard to breathe right now, but we're going to help you, okay?" Eden kept her voice calm and reassuring, while internally calculating the modifications they would need to make to the nebulizer. Lucy nodded weakly, and Eden could see the trust in her eyes. The same trust she had seen in countless patients over the years, the trust that had once motivated her to push through impossible situations and find solutions where none seemed to exist. 30 minutes later, Tommy returned from his dangerous journey through the storm, carrying not just the nebulizer, but also an armload of respiratory medications and supplies. "The wind almost knocked me over twice," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "But I got everything you asked for." Eden immediately set to work modifying the nebulizer, using tubing and connectors from Dr. Wilson's supply to create a makeshift positive pressure system. It wasn't elegant, but it would provide the respiratory support Lucy needed. "This is remarkable," Dr. Wilson said, watching her work. "Where did you learn to improvise like this?" "Refugee camps don't have the luxury of proper equipment," Eden replied. "You learn to make do with whatever's available, or people die." As the modified respiratory system began to help Lucy breathe more easily, Eden felt a familiar satisfaction, the deep professional fulfillment that came from solving complex medical problems under impossible conditions. This was what she had been meant to do. Not hide behind a grocery store counter, but use her skills and knowledge to save lives when it mattered most. Saturday morning brought a brief lull in the storm, but also new challenges. Word had spread throughout the snowbound town about the medical crisis, and more families had made the dangerous journey to the clinic with sick children. Eden now had 17 patients ranging in age from 4 to 12, all showing various stages of the inflammatory syndrome. The clinic had been transformed into something resembling a pediatric ward, with volunteers providing round-the-clock care under her direction. The logistics alone were staggering. 17 sick children required constant monitoring, medication administration, fluid management, and comfort care. Yet somehow, the community had risen to meet every challenge. Parents took turns caring for children who weren't their own. Elderly residents volunteered to cook meals and maintain supplies. Even teenagers pitched in, learning basic care techniques and proving remarkably capable assistants. "Eden, we need to talk about supplies," Dr. Wilson said, approaching her as she adjusted Lucy Thompson's respiratory support. The little girl was breathing much better, though she was still critically ill. "What's our status?" "We're running low on several key medications. The prednisolone will last maybe another day at current dosages. Antibiotics are better, but still limited." Eden had been dreading this conversation. They had stretched their pharmaceutical resources far beyond what anyone would have thought possible. But with 17 patients requiring intensive treatment, supplies were inevitably running short. "What about the pharmacy at Bell and Save?" "Tommy and I inventoried everything yesterday. We've already used most of what's available there." Eden was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. She had faced similar situations in refugee camps, where medical supplies were always limited, and creativity was essential for patient survival. Dr. Wilson, in your medical training, did you ever study traditional or alternative anti-inflammatory approaches? You mean herbal medicine? Folk remedies? I mean evidence-based traditional treatments that might supplement what we're doing. Dr. Wilson looked skeptical. Eden, these children need real medicine, not... I'm not talking about abandoning evidence-based care, Eden interrupted. I'm talking about augmenting it. In refugee camps, I learned to combine traditional remedies with modern medicine when pharmaceutical supplies were limited. She moved to the whiteboard where she had been tracking treatment protocols. Willow bark contains natural salicylates, anti-inflammatory compounds similar to aspirin. Turmeric has documented anti-inflammatory properties. Ginger can help with nausea and has immune-modulating effects. You're suggesting we treat critically ill children with herbs. I'm suggesting we use every tool available to us. Mrs. Henderson has an extensive herb garden, and half the families in town probably have traditional remedies in their kitchens. Before Dr. Wilson could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez approached them with obvious excitement. Dr. Eden, Maria is asking for food. Real food, not just liquids. Is that a good sign? Eden smiled, her first genuine smile in days. That's an excellent sign. It means her inflammatory response is calming down and her body is beginning to heal. As she examined Maria, Eden found confirming evidence of improvement. The little girl's fever was completely gone, her joint pain had subsided, and most importantly, her cardiac rhythm had returned to normal. She's going to be okay, Eden told Mrs. Rodriguez, and saw tears of relief spring to the woman's eyes. Dr. Eden, how can I ever thank you? Just take care of her, and help us take care of the others. As word of Maria's improvement spread through the clinic, Eden could feel the mood lifting slightly, but she knew they weren't out of danger yet. Several children were still critically ill, and their medication supplies continued to dwindle. All right, she said to Dr. Wilson. Let's see what we can do about supplemental treatments. But we approach this scientifically. Documented dosages, careful monitoring, and integration with our existing protocols. Dr. Wilson still looked uncertain, but he nodded. What do you need? I need someone to contact Mrs. Henderson about her herb supplies. I need a team to canvass the town for traditional anti-inflammatory remedies. And I need Tommy to help me research proper dosages and preparation methods. As volunteers mobilized to search for supplemental treatments, Eden returned to her rounds, checking on each of the 17 children who had become her responsibility. The weight of caring for so many critically ill patients was enormous, but she felt stronger and more confident than she had in years. Some children were improving, others were holding steady, and a few were still fighting for their lives. But for the first time since the crisis began, Eden felt cautiously optimistic about their chances. The Thompson twins presented the biggest challenge. Lisa was responding well to treatment, but Lucy's respiratory involvement had made her case more complex. Despite the modified ventilation system, she was still struggling. Eden, Dr. Wilson called from across the room, I think you should see this. He was standing next to 4-year-old Michael Santos, the youngest patient they were treating. Michael had been brought in the previous evening with severe symptoms, and Eden had been worried about his small size and how well he would tolerate the treatment protocols. But now, as she examined him, she found clear signs of improvement. His fever was down, his breathing was easier, and when she tested his reflexes, they were almost normal. This is remarkable, she said. His recovery is faster than any of the others. Why do you think that is? Eden considered the question carefully. Possibly his age. Younger immune systems might be more resilient or less likely to develop the severe inflammatory cascade we're seeing in the older children. It was a hypothesis that would need to be tested with more data, but it gave Eden hope for the youngest patients in their care. As the day progressed, the pattern became clearer. The children who had been treated earliest in the course of their illness were recovering faster and more completely. Those who had arrived with more advanced symptoms faced longer, more difficult recoveries. It was a reminder of how critical timing was in medical intervention, and how much they had accomplished by identifying and treating the syndrome when they did. Eden found herself thinking about the children in other towns that Dr. Kim had mentioned. Had they been as fortunate? Had their communities been able to mobilize effective care? Or had they lost children to delayed recognition and inadequate treatment? The thought motivated her to document everything they were doing even more carefully. If they could save all 17 children in Millbrook, their methods could potentially save lives elsewhere. "Dr. Wilson," she said during a brief break in her rounds, "I want to make sure we're documenting not just our medical protocols, but our community organization strategies. The way we've transformed ordinary citizens into effective medical assistants, that could be invaluable for other rural communities." "You're thinking beyond this crisis." "I'm thinking about prevention. If this syndrome can appear in Millbrook, it can appear anywhere. Other small towns need to know how to respond." As evening approached and the storm continued to rage outside, Eden felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her life for 3 years. They had taken an impossible situation and made it work through determination, creativity, and community cooperation. 17 children were alive because of decisions she had made and treatments she had developed. That knowledge brought both satisfaction and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. But for the first time since Yasmin's death in the refugee camp, Eden felt like she was succeeding as a doctor. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid of it. By Sunday morning, the storm had finally begun to subside, though the roads remained impassable. But something remarkable had happened during the long night of crisis. The entire town of Millbrook had transformed into a medical community working together to save their children. Eden stood in the doorway of the clinic, surveying a scene that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. Volunteers moved efficiently between patients, each trained in specific aspects of care. Mrs. Henderson was preparing herbal supplementations under strict protocols Eden had developed. Tom Bradley had rigged an elaborate system of fans and cooling devices to maintain optimal temperatures for each patient. What impressed Eden most was how quickly ordinary people had adapted to medical responsibilities. Sarah Chen had become expert at recognizing subtle changes in children's conditions. Tommy could calculate medication dosages with accuracy that rivaled trained nurses. Mrs. Rodriguez had learned to perform basic physical assessments that helped track recovery progress. "It's like watching a medical team that's been working together for years," Dr. Wilson observed, joining her in the doorway. "Crisis has a way of bringing out the best in people," Eden replied. The integration of traditional remedies with their pharmaceutical treatments had proven more successful than Eden had dared hope. Carefully prepared willow bark tea was helping to reduce inflammation in several patients, while ginger preparations were managing nausea and supporting immune function. More importantly, the community had embraced the scientific approach Eden insisted upon. Every herbal treatment was documented, every dosage calculated based on body weight and medical literature, every response monitored for effectiveness and side effects. "Dr. Eden?" Sarah approached with a clipboard. "I've been tracking improvement markers like you asked. 13 of the 17 children are showing significant recovery. 3 are stable but still need intensive monitoring. And Lucy's holding her own," Eden finished. "Her respiratory function improved overnight, and I think we're past the critical phase." It was true. Lucy Thompson, who had been their most challenging case, had turned a corner during the night. Her breathing was easier, her fever had finally broken, and she had been awake and alert for several hours. "What about the newest arrival?" Dr. Wilson asked. 8-year-old David Park had been brought in early that morning, carried through the snow by his father when the boy's condition deteriorated rapidly. His case was particularly concerning because it seemed to represent a more aggressive variant of the syndrome. "He's responding to treatment, but slowly," Eden said. I'm adjusting his protocol to account for the rapid progression." As they spoke, Tommy approached with a cup of herbal tea and a concerned expression. "Eden, my mom just called on the clinic's landline. The radio is reporting that several other mountain towns are experiencing similar outbreaks." Eden felt her stomach tighten. How many towns? At least 3 that they know of, and apparently, the state health department is trying to coordinate a response, but the storm has made communication difficult. Any word on when the roads might reopen? Maybe by Tuesday, if the weather holds. Eden looked around the clinic, at their improvised but effective medical facility. They had created something remarkable here. A functioning intensive care unit staffed by grocery store clerks, shop owners, and concerned parents. But the knowledge that other towns were facing similar crises reminded her of how precarious their situation remained. "Dr. Wilson, I think we need to document everything we've done here," she said. "Treatment protocols, dosages, improvised equipment modifications, all of it." "Why?" "Because if other towns are dealing with the same syndrome, they're going to need practical guidance for treatment with limited resources. What we've learned here could save lives elsewhere." Dr. Wilson nodded slowly. "You're thinking like a public health officer." "I'm thinking like a doctor who's seen too many preventable deaths due to lack of information." That afternoon, as several more children showed clear signs of recovery, Eden began the process of systematic documentation. She recorded not just the medical protocols they had developed, but also the community organization strategies that had made their improvised hospital possible. Mrs. Chen had developed an efficient system for managing volunteer schedules. Tom Bradley had created detailed technical specifications for the equipment modifications they had improvised. Mrs. Henderson had documented the preparation and dosage protocols for the herbal supplements they had integrated into treatment. "This is more than just medical documentation," Sarah observed as she helped Eden organize the information. "This is a blueprint for community-based crisis response." "That's exactly what it is," Eden agreed, "and it's exactly what other towns are going to need." The documentation process also served another purpose. It helped Eden process what they had accomplished. Looking at the detailed records of treatments, outcomes, and innovations, she felt a sense of professional pride that had been absent from her life for 3 years. They had taken an impossible situation, and not just survived it, but excelled. 17 children had faced a potentially fatal condition, and through innovative treatment and community cooperation, they were all going to survive. As the sun set on their 3rd day of crisis management, Eden allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. 15 of the 17 children were now stable and recovering. Lucy Thompson was breathing without assistance, though she would need several more days of close monitoring. Even David Park, their most recent and challenging case, was beginning to respond to treatment. But more importantly, they had proven something remarkable: that a small community with limited resources could respond effectively to a serious medical crisis when knowledge, organization, and determination came together. "Eden," Dr. Wilson said, finding her as she completed her evening rounds. "I've been thinking about what happens after this crisis passes." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've just demonstrated that you're an exceptional doctor. You've saved lives, created innovative treatments, and shown leadership that this community desperately needs. What are your plans?" Eden was quiet for a long moment. 3 days ago, she had been a grocery store employee who wanted nothing more than to remain anonymous and forgotten. Now she was responsible for the health and recovery of 17 children, and had created medical innovations that could help other communities facing similar crises. "I don't know," she said finally. "I came to Millbrook to escape medicine, but medicine seems to have found me anyway." "Maybe that's trying to tell you something." Before Eden could respond, Lucy Thompson called out from her bed. "Dr. Eden, could you come here?" Eden approached the 7-year-old who was sitting up for the first time since her respiratory crisis. I just wanted to say thank you, Lucy said in a small but clear voice. My mom told me you saved my life. Eden knelt down beside the bed. You saved your own life by being strong and fighting hard. I just helped a little. Will you still be here when I get better? Eden looked into Lucy's trusting eyes and realized that the question applied to more than just the immediate crisis. The children of Millbrook had become her patients, and the community had become her responsibility in ways she never could have anticipated. I'll be here, she said, for as long as you need me. It was a promise that surprised her with its certainty, but felt absolutely right as soon as she spoke it. Monday morning brought clear skies and the distant sound of snowplows working to reopen the mountain roads. But inside the clinic, Eden barely noticed the changed weather. Her attention was focused entirely on the remarkable recovery taking place around her. 16 of the 17 children were now out of immediate danger. Most were sitting up, eating normally, and showing no signs of the inflammatory syndrome that had threatened their lives just days earlier. The transformation was so complete that newcomers might never have guessed how close the town had come to tragedy. The recovery process had been as remarkable as the crisis itself. Children who had been unconscious with high fevers were now laughing and playing quiet games. Parents who had spent days in terror were now helping care for other families' children, with the easy camaraderie of shared survival. It's almost miraculous, Dr. Wilson said as they completed morning rounds. In all my years of practice, I've never seen such a complete recovery from such a serious condition. Early intervention and intensive supportive care, Eden replied, though she knew there was more to it than that. The community's response had been extraordinary, and the combination of conventional and traditional treatments had proven more effective than she had dared hope. Only David Park remained critically ill, though even he was showing signs of improvement. His case had been complicated by delayed treatment and the aggressive variant of the syndrome, but Eden was cautiously optimistic about his prospects. Eden, Tommy called from the communication station they had set up near Dr. Wilson's office. The state health department is on the radio. They want to speak with you. Eden accepted the radio handset with some apprehension. For 3 days, they had been operating in complete isolation, making medical decisions without oversight or official authorization. Now, the outside world was finally reaching them. This is Dr. Eden Matthews, she said into the microphone. Dr. Matthews, this is Dr. Sarah Kim from the State Health Department Emergency Response Team. We've been monitoring reports of the outbreak in Millbrook. Can you give me a status update? 17 pediatric cases of what appears to be a variant inflammatory syndrome. 16 patients are stable and recovering. 1 remains critical but improving. 17 cases? Our preliminary report suggested only 5 or 6. The syndrome spread rapidly over the first 24 hours. We've had no new cases in the past 48 hours. Dr. Matthews, I need to ask about your credentials. Our records show you were licensed in international medical practice, but we don't have documentation of current domestic licensing. Eden felt her stomach clench. This was the conversation she had been dreading. The official scrutiny that would inevitably follow their improvised medical response. My domestic license lapsed 3 years ago, she said carefully. I've been working in a non-medical capacity. There was a long pause on the radio. Dr. Matthews, practicing medicine without a current license is a serious legal matter. However, given the emergency circumstances and the isolation of your community, we're more concerned right now with understanding your treatment protocols. I can provide complete documentation of all interventions and outcomes. We're particularly interested in your success rate. We've had reports from 3 other affected towns, and their outcomes have been less positive. Eden's heart sank. What kind of outcomes? Significant morbidity, several fatalities. Your community appears to be the only one that has achieved complete control of the outbreak. The weight of that information settled heavily on Eden's shoulders. While they had been fighting to save the children of Millbrook, other communities had been losing their battles against the same syndrome. Dr. Matthews, we're sending a medical team to your location as soon as the roads are passable. We need to understand exactly what you've done differently. After the radio conversation ended, Eden sat quietly in Dr. Wilson's office, processing the implications of what she had learned. Their success hadn't been guaranteed. Other towns had faced the same crisis and had not been as fortunate. Eden? Dr. Wilson found her there an hour later. You look troubled. Other towns lost children to this syndrome. We were lucky. It wasn't luck. It was skill, knowledge, and determination. You created something here that saved 17 lives. I had help. This entire community followed your lead. You made the critical decisions, developed the treatment protocols, and took responsibility for outcomes that could have destroyed your career and your life. Eden was quiet for a moment. Dr. Wilson, when the state medical team arrives, they're going to want answers about my license status, about practicing without authorization. And what will you tell them? The truth. That I did what was necessary to save lives. And if they pursue legal action? Eden looked out the window at the town that had become her home, at the clinic where she had rediscovered her medical calling, at the children who were alive because of decisions she had made in desperate circumstances. Then I'll face the consequences. But I won't regret the choices I made here. That afternoon, as the sound of approaching snowplows grew louder, Eden began preparing for the arrival of outside medical authorities. She organized all of their treatment documentation, prepared detailed case histories for each patient, and compiled the improvised protocols that had proven so effective. But more importantly, she began to think seriously about her future. For 3 years, she had been running away from medicine, haunted by past failures, and convinced that she was no longer fit to make life and death decisions. The crisis in Millbrook had proven her wrong. Under pressure, with limited resources and no backup, she had not only functioned as a doctor, she had excelled. The children who were now laughing and playing in the clinic were living proof that her medical skills were not only intact, but stronger than ever. She thought about Yasmin, the refugee child whose death had driven her from medicine. For the first time in 3 years, she could think about that tragedy without being overwhelmed by guilt and self-doubt. She had done everything possible for Yasmin, just as she had done everything possible for the children of Millbrook. The difference was that this time, it had been enough. Dr. Eden? Maria Rodriguez approached her as she worked on documentation. The little girl was dressed in her own clothes for the first time in days, her dark eyes bright and healthy. Yes, sweetheart? My mama wants to know if you'll still be our doctor when this is all over. Eden knelt down to Maria's level. Would you like me to be your doctor? Yes. And Lucy's doctor and Kevin's doctor and everybody's doctor. Well then, I guess I'd better figure out how to make that happen. As Maria skipped back to her mother, Eden realized that the little girl had just helped her make the most important decision of her life. Whatever legal complications lay ahead, whatever challenges she would face in returning to active medical practice, she was ready to be a doctor again. The children of Millbrook had given her back more than just purpose. They had given her back herself. Tuesday morning brought the rumble of heavy vehicles navigating the newly cleared mountain roads. Eden stood at the clinic window, watching a convoy of state health department vehicles and ambulances make their way through town toward the clinic. Behind her, the transformed space hummed with quiet activity. Most of the children were now well enough to go home, but their families had chosen to stay for the final medical evaluations. The volunteers who had worked tirelessly for days continued their duties, though the atmosphere was lighter now, filled with relief and cautious celebration. The sense of accomplishment was palpable. They had faced an impossible situation, and had not just survived, but triumphed. 17 children had confronted a potentially fatal condition, and all were going to recover completely. "They're here," Dr. Wilson said, joining her at the window. "I know." Eden straightened her shoulders and checked her appearance. She was still wearing the same clothes she had put on 3 days earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she probably looked more like a disaster relief worker than a medical professional, but she felt more like a doctor than she had in 3 years. The first official to enter the clinic was Dr. Sarah Kim, a woman in her 40s wearing CDC credentials and carrying a tablet computer. She was followed by a team of medical professionals, epidemiologists, and what appeared to be a state medical board representative. "Dr. Matthews?" Dr. Kim approached Eden with a professional smile. "I'm Sarah Kim. We spoke on the radio. Dr. Kim." "Welcome to Millbrook." Dr. Kim looked around the clinic with obvious amazement. The space still showed clear evidence of the improvised intensive care unit it had become: monitoring stations, medication charts, improvised equipment modifications, and volunteers moving efficiently between patients. "This is remarkable," Dr. Kim said. "You've created a functioning medical facility using—" "What exactly?" "Determination, community support, and creative problem-solving," Eden replied. "Would you like me to walk you through our protocols?" For the next 2 hours, Eden provided a comprehensive overview of everything they had done. She explained the diagnostic process that had led to her identification of the syndrome, the treatment protocols they had developed, the equipment modifications that had made intensive care possible, and the community organization that had supported round-the-clock patient care. Dr. Kim and her team took extensive notes, photographed equipment modifications, and interviewed volunteers about their roles in the response. What emerged was a picture of medical innovation and community cooperation that impressed even the experienced emergency response professionals. The volunteers spoke with pride about their contributions. Sarah Chen explained the patient monitoring systems she had developed. Tom Bradley demonstrated the cooling equipment he had modified. Mrs. Henderson described the careful preparation of herbal supplements that had augmented their pharmaceutical treatments. "Dr. Matthews," said Dr. Richard Sterling, the medical board representative, "I need to address the licensing issue directly. You've been practicing medicine without a current license, which is typically a serious violation of state medical practice laws." Eden met his gaze steadily. "I understand the legal implications of my actions. I also understand that 17 children are alive today because of those actions. That doesn't necessarily provide legal protection." "Dr. Sterling," Dr. Kim interrupted, "perhaps we should focus on understanding what happened here before we address regulatory concerns." Dr. Sterling looked like he wanted to argue, but Dr. Kim's authority was clear. She turned back to Eden. "Dr. Matthews, what would you say was the key factor in your success here?" Eden thought carefully before answering. "Early recognition of the syndrome, aggressive intervention before critical complications developed, and the integration of conventional medical treatment with community-based supportive care. And the traditional remedies you incorporated? Evidence-based supplementation when pharmaceutical resources were limited. Everything was documented, dosed appropriately, and monitored for effectiveness and side effects." Dr. Kim nodded. "We've reviewed your documentation. It's extraordinarily thorough for an improvised response. Good documentation saves lives. In refugee medicine, you learn that careful records can mean the difference between effective treatment and dangerous guesswork." "About your refugee medicine experience," Dr. Kim said, "your file indicates you worked with Doctors Without Borders for several years. Why did you leave that work?" Eden felt the familiar tightness in her chest, but this time it didn't feel overwhelming. "I experienced a case where my medical judgment was questioned, and the outcome was difficult. I lost confidence in my abilities and decided to step away from practice. And now?" Eden looked around the clinic at the children who were preparing to go home, at the volunteers who had become her medical team, at the evidence of what they had accomplished together. "Now I know that stepping away was a mistake. These children, this community, They've reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. Dr. Kim smiled. Dr. Matthews, the State Health Department would like to offer you a position as a consultant on community-based emergency medical response. Your innovations here could be replicated in other rural areas facing similar challenges. What about the licensing issues? Given the extraordinary circumstances and the clear evidence of your medical competence, I believe the State Medical Board would be willing to expedite reinstatement of your license, pending completion of current continuing education requirements. Dr. Sterling looked uncomfortable, but nodded agreement. The successful outcomes speak for themselves, and Dr. Wilson has provided a strong recommendation for your clinical competence. Eden felt tears threatening for the first time since the crisis began. Are you saying I can practice medicine again? I'm saying that Millbrook needs a doctor, and you've proven you're exactly the doctor this community needs. As the official evaluation concluded and the state team prepared to leave, Eden found herself surrounded by the families whose children she had treated. One by one, they thanked her, hugged her, and asked her to promise she would stay. "Of course I'll stay," she told them. "This is home now." Dr. Wilson approached her as the last of the official vehicles disappeared down the mountain road. "So, Dr. Matthews, what are your plans?" Eden looked around the clinic, already envisioning how they could reorganize it to serve as both an emergency facility and a regular family practice. "I think Millbrook needs a permanent doctor, don't you?" "I think Millbrook needs you specifically. These people trust you. More importantly, you trust yourself again." That evening, Eden walked through the quiet streets of Millbrook, past the grocery store where she had worked for 3 years, past the homes of families whose children she had saved, past the clinic that had become the center of her reborn medical career. The town looked the same as it had a week earlier, but everything was different. She was different. The trauma that had driven her away from medicine had been replaced by the confidence that came from facing the worst kind of medical crisis and emerging successful. At her apartment above the bakery, Eden found a message on her answering machine from Dr. Kim, providing details about the license reinstatement process and the consulting position. But more importantly, there was a message from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Dr. Eden, this is Carmen Rodriguez. Maria wanted me to call and tell you that she's feeling completely better, and she's excited to have you as her real doctor. All of us parents have been talking, and we want you to know that we'll do whatever it takes to help you set up a permanent practice here. This community needs you, and we hope you need us too." Eden smiled as she erased the message. Yes, she thought, she definitely needed them too. 3 years ago, she had come to Millbrook to hide from medicine and from herself. This week, she had discovered that you can't hide from who you're meant to be. The mountains that had once seemed like barriers now felt like protection, sheltering a community that had become her purpose and her home.
Dr. Eden Matthews was back where she belonged. 3 months after the crisis, Eden stood in what would soon become the new Millbrook Family Medical Center. The building had once housed the town's small hardware store, but Tom Bradley had decided to relocate his business and donate the space to create a proper medical facility for the community. "The electrical work is almost finished," Tom said, gesturing to the renovation work happening around them. "And we should have the plumbing for the additional examination rooms completed by next week." Eden looked around the space with satisfaction. It would be a real medical clinic, equipped to handle both routine family practice and emergency situations. The community had rallied to make it happen, with everyone contributing according to their abilities. "What about the medical equipment?" she asked. Dr. Kim was true to her word. "The State Health Department is providing most of the basic equipment, and they've helped us secure grants for the more expensive items." Eden's reinstatement to medical practice had been expedited, just as Dr. Kim had promised. The continuing education requirements had been waived, given her demonstrated competence during the crisis, and she had been officially licensed to practice medicine in the state just 6 weeks after the roads reopened. The consulting position with the state health department had proven incredibly fulfilling. Eden had already traveled to 3 other rural communities to help them develop emergency response protocols based on the Millbrook model. The manual she had written, Community-Based Medical Crisis Response, the Millbrook Protocol, was being distributed to rural healthcare providers throughout the region. Dr. Eden. Maria Rodriguez burst through the door of the construction site, followed more sedately by her mother. Mama says you're going to have your own hospital. Not a hospital, sweetheart. A clinic. A place where I can take care of you and all the other children in town when you need a doctor. Will it have the same machines that helped Lucy breathe? Even better ones, Eden assured her. We'll be prepared for any emergency. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. Maria talks about becoming a doctor every day now. She says she wants to help children just like you did. That's wonderful. The world needs more doctors who care about their communities. As the Rodriguez family continued their tour of the construction site, Eden reflected on how much had changed. The crisis had transformed not just her own life, but the entire community. Millbrook had discovered that they could handle serious challenges together, and that knowledge had given them new confidence and unity. Sarah Chen had left the grocery store to become Eden's first employee, training to be a medical assistant. Tommy was planning to study pre-med at the community college, with the goal of eventually returning to Millbrook as a second doctor. Mrs. Henderson had started a formal medicinal herb garden that would supply traditional supplements for the clinic. The most significant change, though, was in Eden herself. The guilt and self-doubt that had plagued her for 3 years had been replaced by renewed confidence in her abilities. The crisis had proven that she could function under pressure, make difficult decisions, and save lives when it mattered most. Eden? Dr. Wilson appeared in the doorway carrying a folder of papers. I have the final partnership agreements for you to review. Dr. Wilson had decided to delay his retirement to help establish the new practice. They would work as partners, combining his decades of family practice experience with her emergency medicine background and community response expertise. How does it look? Eden asked, reviewing the documents. Like the beginning of something important. Millbrook will have medical care that rivals anything available in the larger cities, but with the personal touch that only comes from being part of the community. And if another crisis arises, we'll be ready. More than ready, we'll be the model that other communities follow. As they discussed the details of their partnership, Eden felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what she had been meant to do. Not hide from her calling, but embrace it fully and use her skills to serve a community that had become her family. The children who had been her patients during the crisis stopped by regularly to check on the progress of the clinic. They had all recovered completely, with no lasting effects from the inflammatory syndrome. More importantly, they had developed a special relationship with Eden that went beyond the typical doctor-patient dynamic. Dr. Eden? Lucy Thompson appeared at the construction site with her twin sister, Lisa. My dad wants to know if the new clinic will have a special room for twins. Eden laughed. We'll have examination rooms that can handle anyone, including troublesome twins who get sick at the same time. We weren't troublesome. We were just really sick. Yes, you were. And you were both very brave. As the twins ran off to explore the construction site, Eden felt a familiar warmth. These children had given her back her sense of purpose, and now she would have the opportunity to watch them grow up, to be their doctor for years to come. The community had also embraced the lessons learned during the crisis. They had established a formal emergency response team, with volunteers trained in basic medical care and crisis management. Mrs. Chen had organized a community first aid training program. Tom Bradley had created an emergency supply cache that would ensure they never again faced critical shortages during a crisis. "Eden," Dr. Wilson said, interrupting her thoughts. "There's something else we need to discuss." Dr. Kim called this morning. There's been another outbreak of the syndrome, this time in a community in Montana. They're asking for our help. Eden felt the familiar stirring of medical urgency. "How bad is it?" 7 children affected so far, but they caught it early this time because the local doctor had read your protocol manual. They want to know if you can consult on their response. Of course. When do they need me? As soon as possible. But Eden, this could become a regular part of your practice. Communities across the country are realizing they need to be prepared for medical emergencies, and you've become the expert on rural crisis response. Eden looked around the construction site that would soon be her clinic, then out the window at the mountains that surrounded her adopted home. Millbrook would always be her base, her primary responsibility. But if her knowledge and experience could help save children's lives elsewhere, she had an obligation to share it. "Set up the consultation," she said. "But make it clear that Millbrook comes first. This community saved me, and I owe them everything." Dr. Wilson smiled. "I think they'd say you saved them. We saved each other." And that's exactly how it should be. As the sun set over the mountains, Eden felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her place in the world, not as someone running from her past, but as someone embracing her future. The children of Millbrook had taught her that sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to heal others. The new clinic would open in 2 months, and with it, a new chapter in her life. But the foundation had already been laid during those critical days when a grocery store clerk had remembered she was a doctor and a community had come together to save their children. Dr. Eden Matthews was home. 5 years later, the Millbrook Family Medical Center occupied a renovated building on Main Street, bustling with activity on a typical Tuesday afternoon. Eden stood in her office, reviewing patient files and preparing for the day's appointments, when she heard familiar voices in the waiting room. Through her office window, she could see Maria Rodriguez, now 11, reading a book to several younger children while their parents waited for appointments. Maria was healthy and vibrant, with no lingering effects from the inflammatory syndrome that had nearly claimed her life 5 years earlier. The syndrome itself had been officially designated as Millbrook Variant Pediatric Inflammatory Syndrome, or MVPIS, by the CDC. The treatment protocols Eden had developed were now part of standard emergency response guidelines for rural communities facing similar outbreaks. Her textbook, Rural Emergency Medicine, Community-Based Crisis Response, was used in medical schools across the country. "Dr. Matthews?" Jenny Wilson, Dr. Wilson's daughter, who had returned from nursing school to help staff the clinic, appeared in her doorway. "Your first appointment is here." "Thank you, Jenny." "Who is it?" "New family. The Hendersons just moved here from Denver, and they heard about our clinic from friends. They specifically requested to establish care with the doctor who saved all those kids during the storm." Eden smiled. The story of the Millbrook outbreak and recovery had spread far beyond the small mountain town. She regularly received calls from other rural communities asking for advice on emergency preparedness and community-based medical response. The clinic now served not just Millbrook, but several surrounding communities. They had established telemedicine connections with the regional hospital for complex cases, but they were also equipped to handle emergencies independently. Eden and Dr. Wilson had trained a team of community members in advanced first aid and emergency response, creating a network of capable volunteers who could assist in any crisis. "Dr. Eden!" Maria Rodriguez appeared in her doorway, having escaped from the waiting room when her mother wasn't looking. Guess what? What, sweetheart? I got accepted to the pre-med program at the state university. I'm going to be a doctor just like you. That's wonderful, Maria. The world needs more good doctors. I'm going to specialize in pediatric emergency medicine, and I'm going to come back here to work with you. We'll save children together. Eden knelt down to Maria's level, though the 11-year-old was now almost as tall as Eden. You know what the most important thing about being a doctor is? What? Caring about people. And you already do that perfectly. As Maria skipped back to the waiting room, Eden reflected on the changes the past 5 years had brought. The clinic had become a model for rural health care, combining traditional family practice with advanced emergency preparedness. They had successfully managed 3 other medical crises in the region, including a food poisoning outbreak and a multi-vehicle accident during another severe storm. Eden's reputation had grown beyond the mountain communities. She served on state medical advisory boards, consulted with the CDC on rural emergency preparedness, and taught courses at the medical school. But Millbrook remained her home and her primary focus. The most satisfying part of her work was the relationships she had built with her patients. She had delivered babies, treated chronic illnesses, provided comfort during difficult times, and celebrated recoveries and milestones with families throughout the region. Tommy, now in his final year of medical school, would be returning to Millbrook the following year to begin his residency under Eden's supervision. Lucy and Lisa Thompson, now 12, both wanted to pursue careers in healthcare. Kevin Chen had developed an interest in medical technology, inspired by the improvised equipment modifications he had witnessed during the crisis. The children who had been her first patients in Millbrook were growing up to become the next generation of healthcare providers, motivated by their early experience with medicine at its most critical and caring. Dr. Matthews? Sarah Chen, now the clinic's office manager, called from the reception area. Dr. Kim from the state health department is online too. She says there's been a situation in Alaska that they'd like you to consult on. Eden picked up the phone, already mentally shifting into crisis response mode. Dr. Kim, what can I do for you? Eden, we've got reports of a cluster of unusual pediatric cases in a remote Alaskan village. The symptoms are different from MVPIS, but the isolation and resource limitations are similar to what you faced in Millbrook. Can you provide remote consultation on their response? Of course. Send me all the available information, and let's set up a video conference with their medical team. As she hung up the phone, Eden felt the familiar stirring of professional purpose. Each new crisis was an opportunity to apply the lessons learned in Millbrook to help other communities develop the skills and confidence needed to protect their children. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Wilson, who was attending a medical conference in the state capital. Eden, just presented our MVPIS protocol to the State Medical Association. Standing ovation. They want to know if you'll keynote their annual conference next year. Eden looked out her office window at the mountains that surrounded her adopted home, at the town that had given her back her purpose, at the clinic that represented her return to the work she was meant to do. She typed back, "Tell them I'm honored, but they'll have to work around my patient schedule." Millbrook comes first, because that was the lesson she had learned during those critical days 5 years ago. That being a doctor wasn't just about medical knowledge or technical skills. It was about being part of a community, caring for people not as cases or conditions, but as neighbors and friends whose lives were precious and worth fighting for. The mountains outside her window stood as eternal guardians over Millbrook, and Eden knew that she had found her place among them, as a healer, as a neighbor, and as someone who had learned that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in service to others. The morning sun climbed higher over the peaks, patients filled the waiting room, and Dr. Eden Matthews prepared to begin another day of the work she was born to do. The grocery store clerk who had once hidden from her calling was now a leader in rural medicine. But more importantly, she was home. In the distance, she could hear children laughing on their way to school, their voices carrying the sound of health and hope through the mountain air. Some of those children had been her patients during the crisis that changed everything. All of them would grow up in a community that had learned how to take care of its own, no matter what challenges arose. Eden Matthews had found her place in the world, not by running from her past, but by embracing her future. And in this small mountain town, surrounded by people who had become her family, she was exactly where she belonged.